walks toward a classroom. A little boy peers down the hallway, and moments later, the rapid fire of bullets. By 11:36, police are there, guns drawn, bulletproof vests on. They run toward
At 10 a.m. on the morning of May 24th, 2022, the Robb Elementary School auditorium in Uvalde, Texas, was filled with the sound of applause. It was the end-of-year awards ceremony, a celebration of childhood achievement. Parents Kimberly and Felix Rubio were there, beaming as their 10-year-old daughter, Lexi, walked across the stage to receive a Good Citizen Award. They told her they were proud, that they loved her, and that they would be back after school for ice cream. It was the last time they would see her alive. Across town, in a small house on Diaz Street, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos was preparing for a different kind of ceremony. At approximately 11:21 a.m., he shot his grandmother in the face, took her truck, and sent a message to an online acquaintance. "I'm going to shoot up an elementary school." It was a promise he intended to keep. On paper, Robb Elementary was a fortress. The Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District had, in the 4 years preceding the attack, more than doubled its security budget. It had expanded its dedicated police force from 4 officers to 6. The state of Texas had provided the district with a grant of over $69,000 to harden its campuses. There were fence enclosures, threat assessment teams, and a visitor management system designed to scan IDs. Most importantly, the district had a written, state-mandated plan for dealing with an active shooter. Just 2 months before the massacre, in March of 2022, the district's police officers had reviewed that plan. The training materials were unequivocal. They contained a passage that, in hindsight, reads as a prophecy and an indictment. It stated, "Time is the #1 enemy during active shooter response. The best hope that innocent victims have is that officers immediately move into action to isolate, distract, or neutralize the threat, even if that means one officer acting alone." The document concluded with a stark moral imperative. A first responder unwilling to place the lives of the innocent above their own safety should consider another career field. This was the illusion of safety. A robust plan, a dedicated police force, and a community that believed its children were protected. It was an illusion that would be shattered in a matter of minutes. At 11:28 a.m., Salvador Ramos crashed his grandmother's truck into a concrete drainage ditch about 100 yards from the school. He emerged from the passenger side, dressed in black and carrying a Daniel Defense DDM-4 V7, an AR-15 style rifle. 2 men from a nearby funeral home saw the crash and ran to help. When they saw the weapon, they turned and fled as Ramos fired at them. They were not hit.
I can't see him! I cannot see him! The kids are running! Oh my God!
first 911 call came at 11:30 a.m. A teacher, seeing the crash and the armed man, relayed the unfolding crisis. In the audio of the call, her voice is a frantic alarm bell, shouting to the children on the playground, "Get down! Get in your rooms! Get in your rooms!" At this moment, the system of protection began to break down. The first opportunity to intercept the shooter was missed. At 11:31 a.m., a school resource officer, who was not on campus at the time of the crash, responded to the scene. He drove his patrol car into the school parking lot at high speed, but drove directly past Ramos, who was, according to official reports, hunkered down behind a vehicle. The officer instead sped toward a teacher in the back of the school, mistaking them for the suspect. The second failure was simpler and more devastating. It was a door. The school's written security policy mandated that all exterior and interior doors remain locked. But an investigation by the Texas House of Representatives later found that this was rarely the case. Due to a lack of keys, staff members would often prop doors open with rocks or wedges, or simply leave them unlocked. The west entrance of Robb Elementary, the one the gunman was now approaching, had a faulty lock. The teacher who had called 911 had earlier propped that same door open with a rock. After seeing the gunman, she ran back and removed the rock, allowing the door to close. But it did not lock. This was not a random stroke of bad luck. It was a known, systemic vulnerability. The door was the school's first line of defense, and it was open. At 11:33 a.m., Salvador Ramos walked through that unlocked door and entered Robb Elementary School unopposed. He turned right and walked down a long hallway. His destination was a pair of adjoining fourth-grade classrooms, 111 and 112. Inside, the end-of-day routines were underway. Children were watching a movie. The gunman stopped in the hallway, just outside the doors. At 11:33 and 24 seconds, he began to fire. He fired round after round from the hallway, riddling the classroom doors with bullets. School surveillance footage captured the sequence. After the initial volley, he entered what appeared to be room 111. Immediately, the sound of children's screams could be heard, followed by a rapid and continuous barrage of gunfire. He then backed out into the hallway, turned slightly, and fired a series of rounds into the adjoining classroom, 112. He then re-entered room 111 and continued to fire. An audio analysis later confirmed that in these first few minutes, Ramos fired at least 100 rounds. The illusion of safety was gone, replaced by the deafening reality of an AR-15. The first police officers arrived with remarkable speed. At 11:35 a.m., just 2 minutes after the gunman entered the building, 3 Uvalde Police Department officers entered through the same west door he had used. They were armed with 2 rifles and 3 pistols. A minute later, at 11:36, 4 more officers entered through a southern door. This group included the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police Chief, Pete Arredondo. Within 3 minutes of the gunman's entry, there were at least 11 armed police officers inside Robb Elementary School. They converged at the intersection of the west and south hallways, just yards from where the shooting was taking place. They advanced toward the classrooms. As they reached the threshold of rooms 111 and 112, the gunman, who was inside room 111, fired at them through the walls and the door. It was 11:37 a.m. The gunfire drove the officers back. 2 of them were struck by shrapnel and building fragments, sustaining grazing wounds. They immediately retreated, taking cover at the ends of the hallway, out of the line of fire. This was the pivotal moment. It was the moment the momentum of the police response died. It was the moment the active shooter protocol, which demanded that officers immediately move into action to isolate, distract, or neutralize the threat, was abandoned. The initial aggressive engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. What followed was a silence, punctuated only by the fading echoes of gunfire and the muffled sounds of terror from behind the classroom doors. The first responders had arrived. They were inside the building. They were armed. But now they were waiting. And for the 19 children and 2 teachers trapped inside classrooms 111 and 112, the long, agonizing wait for rescue had just begun.
I didn't want to tell you everybody because of their mouth. Nobody wasn't even me. I know how to handle these situations. My dad taught me when I was a little girl. Send help when my teachers are still alive, but they're shot. Hello?
I'm calling with the police. Are you okay?
No, there's a school shooting.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I have multiple units there. Are you with officers or are you barricaded somewhere?
I'm in classroom. What's the classroom number? 112. 112? 112, yes, ma'am.
What's your name, ma'am?
Chloe Torres, please hurry. There's a lot of dead bodies.
Carolina, please. You said you're in classroom 112?
Yes, ma'am. Please, send help. How far are y'all away?
They're inside of the building, okay? You just stay quiet, okay?
They're inside the building. You just need to stay quiet.
At 12:03 p.m., 30 minutes after the first officers entered Robb Elementary, a 911 dispatcher in Uvalde received a call. On the other end of the line, a child's whisper. She was in room 112, a classroom full of victims. Over the next 47 minutes, she and other children would call 911 repeatedly, providing real-time, actionable intelligence that there were students still alive, trapped with the killer. At 12:16 p.m., she reported that 8 to 9 students were still alive. At 12:47 p.m., her final desperate plea was recorded. Please send the police now. In the hallway just outside her classroom door, 19 heavily armed officers were already there, and they were waiting. The 77 minutes that passed between the arrival of the first officers and the final breach of the classroom represent one of the most catastrophic failures in the history of American law enforcement. It was not a delay caused by a lack of manpower or firepower. Ultimately, 376 officers from more than 24 local, state, and federal agencies would converge on the school. It was a paralysis of will, a collapse of command, and a profound betrayal of the children they were sworn to protect. The anatomy of this failure began at 11:38 a.m., just 1 minute after the initial officers retreated from the gunman's fire. An officer's voice, captured on body camera footage, makes a declaration that would seal the fate of those inside the classrooms. He says, "He's contained in this office." With that single, catastrophically incorrect assessment, the tactical objective shifted. The incident was no longer classified as an active shooter situation, which would have required officers to immediately and continuously move toward the threat to stop the killing. Instead, it was downgraded to a barricaded subject scenario, a situation where a suspect is contained and no longer has access to victims, allowing officers to slow down, establish a perimeter, and wait for specialized equipment. This decision was made in direct opposition to the evidence. The initial barrage of over 100 rounds, the sounds of children screaming, and the subsequent shots fired from within the classroom all pointed to an active, ongoing massacre. But the barricaded subject mindset took hold, providing a fatal justification for delay. The mission was no longer to save lives. It was to manage a scene. As the minutes ticked by, the hallway outside rooms 111 and 112 became a stage for a slow-motion tragedy of indecision. The Uvalde School District Police Chief, Pete Arredondo, who was later identified by state officials as the on-scene commander, became fixated on a singular, tragically misguided problem: finding a key. Body camera footage shows him trying, and failing, to open a classroom door with a large ring of keys, his focus narrowed to a tactical problem while the strategic imperative, breaching the room by any means necessary, was ignored. He can be heard admitting his own frustration, telling other officers, "People are going to ask what's taking so long." The search for a key was a symptom of a deeper paralysis. The Texas House investigative report would later conclude that the door was likely unlocked the entire time, and that no officer had even tried to turn the handle. They were waiting for a key to a door that was never locked. While the command structure dissolved into a search for keys, the children inside the classrooms were fighting for their lives. Maya Cirillo, an 11-year-old survivor, later described the horror in pre-recorded testimony before the U.S. Congress. After watching the gunman shoot her teacher, Eva Mireles, in the head, Maya was wounded by bullet fragments. Fearing the gunman would return to kill any survivors, she made a decision of unimaginable courage. She covered herself in the blood of a dead classmate lying next to her and played dead. "I thought he would come back," she testified, "so I covered myself with blood. I put it all over me, and I just stayed quiet." Lying amongst the bodies of her friends, she managed to get her deceased teacher's phone and call 911, pleading for help. Her call was one of many. At 12:10 p.m., the first student caller phoned again, stating that multiple people were dead. At 12:13, she called a third time. At 12:19, another student, this one from the adjoining room 111, placed a 911 call, but was told by another terrified child to hang up. This intelligence, that there were living, injured victims trapped with an active killer, was known to dispatchers and was being relayed over the radio. Yet it failed to penetrate the tactical paralysis in the hallway. The U.S. Department of Justice report would later describe this period as one of a great deal of confusion, miscommunication, a lack of urgency, and a lack of incident command. At 11:48 a.m., a moment of profound personal agony unfolded within the professional failure.
That's my wife's classroom.
Was that bro? Yeah. Okay, keep eyes on, keep on. Hey. Ruben.
She said she shot Johnny.
This is not for both of us.
Go. Hey, cross.
UCISD officer Ruben Ruiz, whose wife, teacher Eva Mireles, was inside room 111, entered the hallway. He had received a call from her. He told the other officers, "She says she is shot." He was armed and attempting to formulate a plan to engage the shooter and save his wife, when other officers escorted him from the scene and disarmed him. The image of Officer Ruiz checking his phone, which later sparked widespread condemnation online, was, in reality, a portrait of a husband waiting for a final message from his dying wife. As the number of officers in the hallway swelled, the scene descended into a state of surreal inaction. Surveillance video, later released to the public, provided a damning visual record. The 80-minute recording shows heavily armed officers milling about, some with rifles and ballistic shields, which began arriving at 11:52 a.m. At one point, nearly an hour into the shooting, an officer in tactical gear is seen using a wall-mounted hand sanitizer dispenser, an image that became a symbol of the perceived indifference and lack of urgency.
Hey, we got guys going in to get kids, okay? They're working. They're working. I don't have any information.
I know we can't take our kids to a kid's watch to make sure our kids are coming out.
Yeah, so I'm just saying right here.
Outside the school, a different kind of chaos erupted. Desperate parents, having heard news of the shooting, rushed to the campus. Faced with a cordon of police officers who were preventing anyone from entering the school grounds, their desperation turned to fury. They could hear gunshots from inside. They could see the massive police presence, and they could see that nothing was happening. They begged the officers to go in, Some parents attempted to breach the police lines themselves to do what the nearly 400 trained professionals on scene would not. Law enforcement officers physically restrained them, leading to violent conflicts and detentions. This scene of parents being held back and even handcuffed by the very officers who were failing to confront the killer became a searing symbol of the authorities' abdication of their most fundamental duty. The trust between the community and its protectors dissolved in real time on the lawn of Robb Elementary. At 12:21 p.m., the gunman fired 4 more shots inside the classroom. The sound was captured on a 911 call, a clear indication that the threat was still active. Officers in the hallway moved into a formation outside the doors, but they did not enter. The delay was not just a tactical failure, it was a failure of humanity. The concept of moral injury is a distinct form of trauma that results from perpetrating, failing to prevent, or witnessing acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. For a law enforcement officer, whose professional identity is built around the duty to protect the innocent, the failure to act for 77 minutes while children were being murdered represents a profound violation of that core duty. The dissonance between their training, their duty, and their reality on that day is a textbook scenario for inducing a psychological wound that can lead to severe and lasting consequences. The standoff finally ended, not by the order of a local commander, but by the initiative of a federal tactical team. Members of the U.S. Border Patrol's elite BORTAC unit, who had arrived on scene at 12:15 p.m., eventually organized and executed a breach. At 12:50 p.m., using a janitor's key to open the likely unlocked door and a ballistic shield for cover, the team entered the classroom. The gunman emerged from a closet while opening fire and was fatally shot by the entry team. The 77-minute paralysis was over. As officers entered the room, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. The bodies of children were, in the words of the pediatrician who treated them, pulverized and decapitated. But amidst the carnage, there were signs of life. At least 4 victims were still alive when the officers finally entered. Teacher Ava Mireles died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. 2 children died at Uvalde Memorial Hospital. A justice of the peace who served as the on-duty coroner would later state that he believed 4 victims might have survived with faster medical attention. The Department of Justice report was unequivocal in its final assessment. Had law enforcement followed accepted practices, it concluded, lives would have been saved and people would have survived. The hallway at Robb Elementary, a space just feet from the massacre, crowded with overwhelming force, had become a stage for profound impotence and institutional collapse. The protectors had failed to protect. And for the children and teachers of rooms 111 and 112, help had arrived too late.
They showed amazing courage by running toward gunfire for the singular purpose of trying to save lives.
In the hours after the shooting, as a community buckled under the weight of an unspeakable loss, the first official story of Uvalde was being written. It was a story of heroism. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, speaking to the world, praised the law enforcement response. He said, quote, "The reason it was not worse is because law enforcement officials did what they do. They showed amazing courage by running toward gunfire with the singular purpose of trying to save lives." A document, apparently prepared for law enforcement to read from, echoed this sentiment, stating, quote, 40 minutes were not wasted, but each. minute was used to save lives of children and teachers. This was the first official story of Uvalde. It was a lie. And for the families of the 21 victims, the fight against the gunman was over. But a new war, a war for the truth, was just beginning. The heroic narrative, crafted in the immediate fog of crisis, crumbled with astonishing speed. As fragments of the real timeline began to emerge, the story of courage was replaced by a story of cowardice. The 77-minute delay became the central damning fact of the case, a fact that could not be spun or obscured. The chasm between the official story and the horrifying reality created a second trauma for the Uvalde community, a profound and lasting loss of trust in the very institutions meant to protect them. The U.S. Department of Justice would later condemn this failure of public communication, stating that the misguided and misleading narratives, leaks, and lack of communication about what happened on May 24th is unprecedented and has had an extensive negative impact on the mental health and recovery of the family members and other victims, as well as the entire community of Uvalde. The families, consumed by a grief now compounded by betrayal, refused to accept the official story. They demanded answers. They demanded evidence. And so began the long, arduous battle for information. State and local agencies, particularly the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Uvalde District Attorney's Office, fought for years to prevent the release of public records. They cited an exemption in Texas law known as the dead suspect loophole, arguing that because the gunman was killed, the investigation remained technically open, allowing them to withhold body camera footage, 911 call records, and internal communications. It was a legal maneuver that felt, to the families, like a cover-up. It took a years-long lawsuit brought by a coalition of 18 news organizations to pry some of the records loose, with a state appeals court finally ordering their release in July of 2025, more than 3 years after the massacre. As the truth trickled out, a series of official investigations began to paint a clearer and far more damning picture. In July of 2022, a Texas House of Representatives investigative committee released a 77-page report that was the first to officially label the response a product of systemic failures and egregious, poor decision-making. It spread the blame widely, concluding that the nearly 400 responders on scene failed to adhere to their active shooter training, and they failed to prioritize saving the lives of innocent victims over their own safety. Then, in January of 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice released its exhaustive, nearly 600-page critical incident review. Compiled over 20 months from over 14,000 pieces of data and 260 interviews, it was the most comprehensive assessment of the tragedy to date. Its conclusion was blunt. U.S. Attorney General Merrick B. Garland stated, quote, "The law enforcement response at Robb Elementary on May 24, 2022, and the response by officials in the hours and days after, was a failure." The report cataloged the cascading failures in leadership, tactics, and training, and stated unequivocally that had accepted practices been followed, lives would have been saved and people would have survived. But even this scathing federal indictment was not the final word. In a move that left the victims' families furious and distraught, the city of Uvalde released its own separate investigation in March of 2024. A private investigator hired by the city, Jesse Prado, presented a report that cleared all local police officers of wrongdoing. In a presentation that defied the findings of every other major inquiry, Prado defended the officers' actions, stating they showed immeasurable strength and level-headed thinking by waiting for more than an hour before confronting the gunman. He even appeared to blame the families who had rushed to the school, stating, quote, "At times they were difficult to control. They were wanting to break through police barriers. Family members erupted in anger, shouting and storming out of the city council meeting. One father, Ruben Zamora, whose daughter Maya was wounded, captured the sense of outrage. He said, quote, "My daughter was left for dead." These police officers signed up to do a job. They didn't do it. The conflict between the city's self-exonerating report and the damning conclusions of the state and federal investigations created a sense of whiplash for the community. It reinforced the family's belief that local officials were unwilling to hold their own accountable, and it solidified their resolve to seek justice through other means. While the battle for information raged, the family's demand for tangible consequences began to yield slow but significant results. The first and most high-profile figure to face professional repercussions was the man at the center of the failed response. UCISD Police Chief Pete Arredondo. Initially, newly released records show the school district planned to publicly defend him, with a spokesperson drafting a press release that praised his actions. But as the horrifying details of the delay became public, that support evaporated. Arredondo was placed on administrative leave in late June of 2022, and following intense pressure from the community, was fired by the Uvalde School Board in a unanimous vote on August 24, 2022. Through his attorney, Arredondo called the vote an illegal and unconstitutional public lynching. For the families, however, firings were not enough. They demanded criminal accountability. This process proved to be agonizingly slow. In January of 2024, more than a year and a half after the massacre, Uvalde District Attorney Christina Mitchell finally convened a grand jury to review evidence and consider criminal charges against law enforcement officers. In June of 2024, the grand jury returned the first criminal indictments. Pete Arredondo was indicted on 10 state jail felony counts of abandoning or endangering a child. A second former UCISD officer, Adrian Gonzalez, was indicted on 29 counts of the same charge. The indictments accused the officers of placing the surviving children in imminent danger by failing to follow their active shooter training and by giving directions that delayed the police response. Both men turned themselves in, were released on bond, and subsequently pleaded not guilty to all charges. A tentative trial date has been set for October 20th, 2025. Though legal experts and the defendant's own attorneys have suggested that delays are likely. While some family members expressed that the indictments represented a small measure of justice, many felt more officers should have been charged. Jerry Mata, whose 10-year-old daughter Tess was killed, said after a hearing, quote, "For only 2 to be indicted, there should have been more. Because there was a lot of ranking officers during that day that knew what to do but decided not to. But they only got these 2. We'll take what we get, and we're just going to continue fighting for the kids and the 2 teachers and see it all the way through." Parallel to the criminal proceedings, the families launched a sophisticated and multi-pronged civil litigation strategy. Their goal was not merely to punish individual officers, but to hold every system accountable, from the local municipality and the state police to the corporations that manufactured and marketed the weapon used in the attack. In May of 2024, just before the 2-year anniversary of the shooting, the families announced they had reached a $2 million settlement with the city of Uvalde. The monetary figure was modest by design. Attorneys for the families stated explicitly that they did not want to pursue a lawsuit that could bankrupt the city they live in and love. The true significance of the settlement lay in its non-monetary terms, which were aimed directly at reforming the Uvalde Police Department and healing the community. The city agreed to implement a new, more rigorous fitness for duty standard for its police officers, to be developed in coordination with the U.S. Department of Public Safety. It also committed to providing enhanced training for officers, supporting mental health services for the community, designating May 24th as an annual day of remembrance, and working with the families to design and build a permanent memorial at the city plaza. Veronica Luavanos, whose daughter Jayla and nephew Jace were killed, called the settlement, quote, "a first good faith effort, particularly by the city of Uvalde, to begin rebuilding trust in the systems that failed to protect us." While a settlement was reached with the city, the families simultaneously launched a far more ambitious lawsuit against the state of Texas. They sued 92 individual officers from the Texas Department of Public Safety who were on the scene at Robb Elementary, accusing them of cowering in fear while their children died. The lawsuit seeks at least $500 million in damages, arguing that the failure of the heavily armed and trained DPS troopers to engage the shooter cost lives. This lawsuit faces a formidable legal obstacle: the judicial doctrine of qualified immunity, which shields government officials from liability unless their actions violate a clearly established constitutional right. But the family's most groundbreaking legal action was directed not at the government, but at a trio of corporations they accuse of forming a 3-headed monster that armed, trained, and cultivated the shooter. This novel strategy targets the entire ecosystem that they argue makes such shootings possible, filing separate but coordinated lawsuits against the gun manufacturer Daniel Defense, Instagram's parent company Meta, and Activision, the maker of the video game Call of Duty. The lawsuit against Daniel Defense alleges that the company engaged in unfair and illegal marketing practices, specifically targeting vulnerable and violent young men with militaristic imagery. Most damningly, the suit claims that Daniel Defense directly marketed its rifle to the Uvalde shooter while he was still 17 years old. According to the lawsuit, the shooter created an account on the company's website, placed the rifle in his virtual shopping cart, and subsequently received an email from Daniel Defense reminding him, quote, "Your DDM-4 V7 is ready in your cart." This, the suit argues, was an illegal offer to sell a firearm to a minor under Texas law. The shooter completed the purchase just 23 minutes after midnight on his 18th birthday, only 8 days before the massacre. The second lawsuit targets Meta and Activision. It argues that Activision's hyper-realistic first-person shooter game, Call of Duty, which prominently features the Daniel Defense rifle used in the attack, effectively served as a combat simulator that trained the gunman and desensitized him to violence. Simultaneously, the suit alleges Meta's platform Instagram provided an unsupervised channel for Daniel Defense to aggressively market its weapons directly to adolescents in violation of Instagram's own policies. The legal team, led by Josh Koskoff, who secured a landmark $73 million settlement against gunmaker Remington for families of the Sandy Hook victims, is attempting to replicate that success. The companies have moved to dismiss the suits, arguing their products are protected by the First Amendment and other federal laws. Together, these criminal and civil actions demonstrate that the quest for accountability in Uvalde is a comprehensive, multi-front war. It is a sophisticated strategy that targets not only the individual failures of officers on the ground, but also the policy failures of the municipality, the inaction of the state, and the corporate practices that, the families argue, create the very conditions for such tragedies to occur. The courtroom has become the new battlefield. It is no longer a fight against a single gunman, but a complex war against institutional inertia, corporate liability, and the legal doctrines that shield the powerful from accountability. The fight is not just for Uvalde, but to set a precedent for the future. A fight for truth waged in the names of 21 people who can no longer speak for themselves.